Hi, Heart of Healthcare listeners. I'm Katie, the CEO of Rock Health, and we're excited for the 14th Annual Rock Health Summit on September 30th. Tickets are still available. We hope you will join us in person in San Francisco or online with our virtual audience. Check out rockhealthsummit.com for more info. See you there.
Hello, listeners. We had a little recording glitch a few minutes into this episode, so Chrissy's voice will sound pretty different after a little bit, but we hope you still enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Halle.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Krause. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Halle, and today I'm talking with one of my dear friends and longtime colleagues, Christina Farr. I met Chrissy when she was a digital health reporter, and we were both living in San Francisco. Chrissy has since gotten into investing. She co-founded Scrub Capital, and now she's introducing her new book, The Storyteller's Advantage: How Powerful Narratives Make Businesses Thrive. Chrissy has spent years on both sides of the table, listening to thousands of startup pitches as a reporter, then helping companies shape their own narratives as an investor and startup advisor. She's thought deeply about why some stories stick, why others fall flat, and how narrative power shapes entire industries. And today we're going to talk about just that. Chrissy, congrats on the book and welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Halle, and congrats on your book as well. I love that we have just gone through so many phases of life together and now in this kind of moment of writing a book. So you, of all people, know what it takes. And thank you so much for the
Thank
support.
you. You're about 3 or 4 months ahead of me, so I'm just going to try to learn from you as you go through this.
Godspeed. That's all I can say.
So you shared, somehow you calculated this, that you've listened to more than 5,000 hours of pitches, which is astonishing. And I'm wondering, just to open, if you have a favorite, most memorable pitch ever.
My gosh, that is such a good question. I don't know that I have one pitch in particular that stood out, but I have definitely had a series of moments where I've met founders where I just almost immediately, even at the pre-seed, seed stage, when the idea is basically just on a napkin scrolled out, but I could just tell that that company was going to be successful immediately just on meeting the founder. And I included actually a few of those in the book. And, one of those people was Aaron Levy from Box. For a hot minute, I covered enterprise software before I got into health tech. And he was one of the first founders that I met with when he was starting that company, which of course now is publicly traded. And he was just so funny. And he was he didn't take himself too seriously. He wasn't overly pitchy. It was just I just remember sitting there and thinking, wow, that was a really fun 45 minutes. Instead of, it didn't even feel like a pitch, but I definitely had an understanding of what his business was by the end of it. Yeah. So he was one that I was like, that one, he's going places. And I think now he has 3 million followers on X and he's been very successful.
Yeah.
Another one outside of healthcare was meeting Reddit back in the early days. And I always found Alexis Ohanian to be super compelling because he would just sit with you and ask you so many questions about yourself. He wasn't just pitchy in the same way that Aaron wasn't pitchy.
Yeah.
And he genuinely liked meeting people that were writers and journalists, and he would stay in touch over the years. He's always been very responsive to me. And I think he had that kind of storytelling capability that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room when you were speaking with him. In healthcare, I will say there have been fewer of them. But, maybe you would agree with me that a lot of people think Glenn Tolman is a very powerful storyteller. I think he is. I think he's got a lot of energy, and I do.
Yeah. And I also recently heard he only sleeps 4 hours a night.
Yes, he did tell me when we first met that he had a condition where he doesn't need to sleep very much. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. I've also backed that up by talking to people who've worked for him that say that he does email at 3:00 in the morning. So I think it is actually true.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a powerful storyteller. I mean, Jonathan Bush has his moments, and I do find him extremely entertaining. He's very funny.
He wrote a good book.
And
I liked his book.
I liked his book too. I think he's another one that like you
Yeah.
could probably take tips from. But again, it's like it's hard to study these people and then say I'm just going to replicate them, because one of the big reasons that storytellers are so effective is because they're authentic. Like I'm never going to be like Jonathan Bush. Like you're not going to be like Jonathan Bush. He's kind of unique unto himself. So I think you have to be inspired by these people, but then not copy them.
Yeah, it's interesting that the commonality, I think, of the folks that you've mentioned is like they're all very likable people. How much is just being charismatic and warm and like having that energy? How much of that makes it just easier and storytelling comes more naturally to people like that, maybe?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that maybe you and I have in common, Halle, is that we are both insatiably curious and we ask a lot of questions when we meet people. We're both, I would think of myself as a student of healthcare, and I think you feel the same way. You're always learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes you an effective storyteller is most people just want to talk about themselves. They go into a room and they have the pitch, and then you just have to sit there and listen to it, and then it's over. And it's not memorable because you felt, in that moment, usually quite distracted. You probably weren't listening, like you were just getting pitched at. And I think people who walk into a room instead with curiosity about who they're interacting with and that ask questions, I think those people tend to be more likable. And oftentimes those are the best storytellers as well.
Yeah.
And one of the people that I became quite obsessed with while I was researching the book is Michael Moritz, who a lot of people think is the most successful VC of all time. But he actually got his start as a journalist. He was quite a successful one, and he wrote a couple of books, including one that's worth reading on Steve Jobs. But I talked to a bunch of people who worked with him back in the day at Sequoia, and he would famously sit down with a founder and he would, they would immediately pull out the business plan and try to pitch him the PowerPoint. And he would say, just put it down. Like, tell me about where you come from. What school did you go to? What was your childhood like? What was your relationship like with your parents? Like, he was interested in the person behind the company. And if he could get conviction on the idea that you had that grit, that there was something driving you to be successful, then he was interested in thinking about the business plan. But I think he knew that like these business plans, they change. I mean, most companies will pivot 10 times before they get to any kind of product market fit. And so what I think he was looking for was, it's that quality that makes you just unable to fail. That means that you will just keep going. And then the last thing I'll say on this is that back in the day when I was a journalist, I used to get a lot of scoops, just information that I wasn't supposed to have. And people would ask me all the time, like, what did you do to get this information? And I will say that, like, the whole secret behind this was that I would just sit with people and I would just show up and I would just would ask them questions. I would ask question after question. And, like, most people ask so few questions of the people that they're with that it kind of shocked the folks that I was sitting with, because I was just genuinely really wanted to hear about them. And then sometimes things would come up in the course of all the questions that would lead me to some great stories.
Yeah.
But that's all it was. There wasn't anything more than that.
Yeah. In your book, you talk about kind of the three types of founder stories. So there are the comeback kid, the brilliant child, and the personal experience. And we can go into them. But first, my first reaction to that was how in healthcare, we definitely hear that personal experience story the most from founders. I suffered through this terrible healthcare experience, and that's why I started this company. That storyline, it's like almost expected in this industry.
Oh my gosh, we hear it ad nauseum. I got diabetes and then started a diabetes company. I had a brush with cancer and then started a primary care company. I mean, I think it's it remains like a very effective story for healthcare. And I think it is most effective when it's true. I've definitely heard versions of this story from people where I'm like, I don't really get the connection between,
it's a stretch.
It seems like a stretch to me that you started a concierge medical practice after like a sibling was in a bicycle accident. Like I'm not necessarily getting that, and they may go too far. But then I think there are, I looked at other industries as well where, maybe it's less mission in its orientation, and just to see what stories would come up there. And that's where I identified the other two that I think could be kind of, fun for healthcare founders to consider. So one was the comeback kid that you mentioned. And I love this story. I use the example of Apoorva Mehta, who started a company called Instacart that clearly became a huge success. But I remember sitting with him back in the day, and he would just tell me about all the bad ideas that he had that were total failures. I think he had talked about having literally dozens of ideas that failed. And people loved that about him, that he was kind of willing to fess up to that. And I think studies also support that, when people are open about failure, it just builds that likability and credibility. So I call that the comeback kid. And then you got the brilliant child, which I see a lot in areas like fashion and media, entertainment, consumer, and also
less so
tech.
in healthcare.
Less so in healthcare, but it's kind of like the Mark Zuckerberg, like this kind of person that was predestined to be successful because the kid that was doing the paper route, age 8, and had built a whole small business in their town around this paper route. And I think people love those stories too. So, that could also work, I think, in a healthcare context.
Well, let's talk about comeback kid, because that's probably the one that we hear least of in healthcare. There's like a shame in failure in healthcare, even though we know that 90% of startups fail. And one of the studies that you share in your book, which I thought was fascinating, was the study of founder pitches at Stanford, and how within this particular cohort, failure had become part of the social norm, and that it was actually described by these founders more often than success. And I just love thinking about places where we can remove the stigma behind failure. And healthcare is just not there. And obviously some failure in healthcare can be really catastrophic and terrible for patients. And so, we don't want to celebrate things like Theranos, but we want to also make founders comfortable with the fact that most ideas don't fail for bad reasons. They're too early. There's a whole host of reasons it might not work out, but it's not the end of their entrepreneurial journey. It's not their end of making a difference in healthcare.
Yeah, I think the study you mentioned was fascinating. It was a group of researchers that looked at transcripts from Stanford students between 2001 and 2013. And these students mentioned the word fail 600 times, appearing in all but 3% of the presentations. So there is a high comfort with failure in tech. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that we don't see it as much in healthcare. And these businesses are so much more likely to fail, in my opinion. Yeah. It is so much more challenging in healthcare. And yet I think we project a lot more just linear success. And it could be that it's perceived as what incumbents want to hear. It could just be that it's the culture that we've created, but we do not talk about failure nearly enough. And I also have a section in the book, in the second half of the book, that's about the power of the underdog, and just going into all the different studies that show that being an underdog is actually something that is very effective from just a human psychology perspective. And if you can align yourself with, the idea of being, a scrappy founder who has faced and confronted failure and continues to fight against an incumbent that is far bigger and could squish them at any moment, and yet you keep going, people love that. I mean, think of every single sports movie of all time. We love the idea of getting behind an underdog. And I've even read studies that we are so conditioned to favor the underdog that we will start rooting for an underdog, and then as soon as the underdog becomes the leader, then we flip back to we abandon them. So if your business is just successful and the leader in everything, then why would anybody root for you to succeed?
Mm-hmm. So how do you keep that underdog narrative? You really can't. So you just really need to play that card while you can. While you have the chance to use that as one of really the only advantages that you have as a startup. You're in many ways at a disadvantage, but for that one piece, which is people want to root for the underdog.
100%. I think PillPack is actually a great example from our industry that this was a scrappy startup in the pharmacy space going up against some huge CVS, SureScripts, these big companies. Yeah. And I think the press just generally found themselves favoring PillPack basically at any moment where anything would boil over and there would be a dispute, because they consistently leaned into that idea of being the underdog that was just trying to serve patients with, essentially mail order prescriptions, although they didn't want to call it that at the time. But that's what it was. It was like very convenient delivery of prescriptions. And they were the underdog trying to do that.
Yeah.
And these, bigger players were trying to stop them. And the press fell for it, like hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
We adored them for it. And then, of course, they had this big outcome where they sold to Amazon. You can't really call Amazon an underdog. So maybe they don't lean into that quite as much now.
You don't hear about it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. But for the time that they were in, it was highly successful. And I will say the last thing that I will say on this is that most companies that do succeed in healthcare will succeed through M&A, not IPO. And if you are a company that is looking to make an acquisition, you want to buy the disruptor, typically. You don't want to buy the thing that's just going to make your business like 1% more accretive. Like you want to buy something that you feel like is going to position you well for the future so that you yourself don't get disrupted by a company like that. So leaning into underdog disruptive language, I think, is very powerful. And healthcare companies just don't do it very much.
Yeah. Let's talk about PillPack again, though, because I actually did a case study in my book about them. So they not only have that brilliant child story as well as this underdog story, but there was a story of them their business almost getting shut down when one of the PBMs refused to work with them anymore.
Yes, I covered it. I remember it well.
So they put together this fixed pharmacy website, and they got
they had a war room. It was crazy.
Yeah, within it was 48 hours, they were able to get all these patient testimonials, really just begging the industry, saying how necessary this is, and they were able to change hearts and minds. And it was just something that a incumbent could not have done. It was truly one of those, the only card they could play was being the underdog, and they played it beautifully. And they turned it around. And I
remember at the time the head of comms, who's very lovely and is in the book, and she told me that part of the playbook came from, they had an investor in Menlo Ventures who had also backed Uber. And so they had a guy come in who was an advisor through this period that had also advised Uber, which was playing the same kind of underdog game, basically the whole time they were growing. And so that's where I think a lot of this came from, the ideas around, or some of the ideas around that really kind of turned this around for them, leveraging the press, leveraging their own patients. They played the whole thing so well. And meanwhile, Express Scripts, which was the PBM, just assumed that to put out a statement to the press, and that was pretty much what they did, would be enough to quash this threat. And it wasn't, because of the momentum that they had built. It's a storytelling masterclass. And I'm so glad you covered it as well. And I think you're right that they basically have ticked almost every single box, and they did it simultaneously. And then remember, the CEO of PillPack, TJ, would always talk about how he came from a family of pharmacists, and how when he was a child, he was doing pharmacy delivery, and how it revealed to him that this was so broken because elderly people had to go and get all these complicated medications they couldn't understand. And again, when you read the book, it's you will see these tactics playing out with that one company. And I think it's a brilliant example.
So you describe storytelling as gas poured on fire, and that it can accelerate both great companies, but also dubious ones. How do you think about that, dual edge, especially in digital health, where trust is so important? And then specifically, you and I both were living in Silicon Valley and followed Theranos through becoming the media darling, front cover of Forbes, and, Elizabeth Holmes being the person every reporter wanted to cover, to crashing and burning and becoming just a really fantastic podcast and movie. And, and that being kind of the example I think of about gas poured on fire when it comes to great storytelling, despite not having a working product and real business.
Yeah. And I think the other good example is the whole FTX blow up that, was basically a Ponzi scheme in the crypto space. So I talked about that as well in the book. I don't know that Elizabeth Holmes was a great storyteller. I interviewed her a number of times.
You did, yeah.
Yes, like 2 or 3 times, maybe more than that, back in the day. And I never wrote about her. I stand true to this, by the way. If you do a search, I never wrote a positive story on the business. I did a couple actually kind of investigative stories around, mostly on a freelance basis, because there was a period that nobody really wanted to cover that side of Theranos. And obviously the journal was really the one that did the bulk of the work. But there were a few of us at the time. I think you were also skeptical. And you were one of the first people I remember that said to me, like, something is not sitting right with me on this. So there was a group of us that just kind of didn't feel like it all added up. And the reason I say I don't think she was a good storyteller is because she was successful, I think, because she jumped on a trope, which was basically to mimic Steve Jobs, is what she, is essentially what she did.
Literally, yes.
And then she kind of played us in the sense that, like, we really wanted a woman to be successful. And that was just at the time, like, a really appealing idea. But I don't think she was a good
the brilliant
story.
Child, right? Like the young
she had
woman.
that story, the the Stanford thing. But again, that kind of was like Steve Jobs. So, but it wasn't authentic. Like, I never had an experience with her where I thought she was authentic. And usually at the time I was covering more biotech. And most of the time when you would ask biotech founders, like, would love to see the studies, like, would love to see the data, they would be like, yes, like, let's talk about it. Let's delve into it. Because biotech companies have to do that. I mean, it's, that's part of it's different than digital health. Like, there is a regulatory component of which you have a bunch of things you have to prove through studies and data. So that was not controversial. It was a normal question. And she just reacted, I remember, so distinctly. Like, she reacted so negatively to the question that, to me, it was an almost immediate red flag. Yeah. And I didn't find her to be open, and I didn't find her to be authentic. I found her to be incredibly coached. And she would always have this entourage of people that was telling her, like lawyers, communications people telling her what to say. Like, to me, that is not good storytelling. I think she just kind of lucked out by this at this moment where, like, a lot of gazillionaires really wanted to leave a legacy by helping prop up a female CEO and turning them into a big success story. I don't know if anything like that would be possible today, just given where politics are. But I think it was a moment in time. She played her cards very well, but I would not say she's a good storyteller.
No. So just thinking about how she came to rise and then crash down, there are so many cases where I would say not even just founders who committed fraud, but there's something about flying too close to the sun when it comes to press that you see female founders who get a ton of great press and then someone wants to tear them down. And we've just seen this over and over and over again. Is there something that has to do with, like, you're too public, you've said too much, you've gotten too much coverage that people stop liking you?
Yeah, this is a really tough one for me because on the one hand, I have this, like, inclination with women that I know to tell them, like, we are disadvantaged in every which way. We make less. We're far less likely to ascend to senior roles. The one thing we do seem to have is that women are very just, I think, good on TV. We're really good on stage. The journalists just want to talk to us a little bit more. And I think we have that. So we should use that, right? Like, if you have a lot of disadvantages, you should take the advantage that you have and run with it. On the other hand, there was this period of time that I think is ending, but it was real over maybe a 5 or 10 year period where we just kept tearing down women CEOs. It was Outdoor Voices was one of these. I think we had, like, a bunch of it in healthcare too. With there was Spring Health. There was in healthcare. It was with Spring Health. There was the Wing. With just countless examples of this, and some of it was actually warranted, and then a lot of it was just like, why are you writing an article about a founder that expects her employees to attend a meeting at 6 p.m.? Like, I think we just kind of got into this place where we thought working at a startup is like working at Google. And no, if you sign up for a startup, it's going to be more intense. Like, that's just how it is. And, I'm sorry to tell you that, like, it's maybe not appropriate for, like, every moment in life. Like if I'm, I've had periods in my life where I could definitely have like gone hard at a startup, and then other periods where it's probably not the right thing. And so I think being able to just have those open and honest conversations about what expectations should be if you are trying to join a company that's in building mode, right? And I think women were expected to both be as successful as men when it came to growing the business, hitting, the top line revenue numbers. They had boards that put pressure on them. And at the same time, they also had to be like, yeah, sure, you could take off 3 weeks on a sabbatical to write your memoir. And then people would get pissed off because they were like, oh my God, this woman is supposed to be so warm and cuddly. Yeah. So I think that was kind of part of it, that we had these expectations of women, that were just not placed on men. Like male founders are expected to be kind of intense and like a little bit of an asshole sometimes. Like we give them, we let them get away with that stuff because we know that they're doing something really hard. Women are doing that same hard thing, but we don't let them get away with it. And I think there is that double standard. But to your question of press and should you embrace it, I think most press you should do. Like that's just my default. The only time I would say like maybe don't do it is if the purpose of the press is to say like ask you probing questions about your personal life or like something that makes you really uncomfortable. But for the most part, it is a good thing to be out there and share your ideas with the world. And if you have, again, all the things stacked up against you, then you should say yes to the things that could help you move your business forward. And if women have that advantage, we should take it.
Yeah. I'm just afraid that there are several women executives that I know that are like, have pulled back from press for that reason. Like they don't want to be a household name, because then becoming a household name puts you in a position where someone can tear you down because you're public enough to be torn down.
Yeah. I mean, if I was sitting down with them, I would say, I totally get where you're coming from. That is a completely valid feeling. And also like, you have to just do it because we live at a time when, it's just not, it's very hard to build a business these days that has zero attention, or that like the founder, the idea that people will only care about the product or the technology and not the founder is a fallacy. Like you just have to, and find a way to do it, that feels sort of balanced, and maybe pick and choose the things that you do and don't do. But the idea that you can just keep your head down and do operational work, like if that's what you want to do, then maybe you shouldn't be the CEO, because the CEO has to be that publicly facing figurehead. It doesn't have to be the founder. Like you could bring on somebody who is comfortable with it and wants to run with that. But like increasingly at the time that we live in, like I have not seen too many examples where a founder CEO can just be like complete head in the sand in healthcare and still have the success. And maybe they don't get away with it, for a period of time. But I think you have to ask the question, like, how much more successful would they have been if they had been out there, like exciting people, inspiring people, having that relevance? Like I think it makes businesses literally twice as successful.
Yeah. Is there any, you mentioned one reason to say no would be like talking about your personal life. Like if a reporter wants to know things that are inappropriate, that's a good reason to say no. What would you say about a reporter who wants to get like the scoop on your competitor, or wants, there's like a negative article coming out and they want you to chime in? Would you say those are cases where you should still lend your voice, or do you think that you should only lend your voice when it's like related to your company or a positive spin on the industry?
So I think this comes back to the point of PE pathos. So a lot of people right now just want to say, I don't like journalists. Like that seems to be a very vogue, cool thing to say. And I think some of the venture funds have perpetuated that idea.
Really?
Like, I'm sorry, but you guys...
That's terrible.
Oh my God, we should talk about that offline.
Yeah.
That I think there are more VCs now spreading that idea.
Oh my
like
gosh.
a lot of people want to say, I don't like the media, I don't like or want to talk to journalists. And that's associated as well with this idea of going direct, like only doing things through your own kind of megaphones, whether it be your own social media presence and never talking to the press. Like that is an idea I hear a lot in Silicon Valley. To me, this is a mistake because the press has distribution and it takes a really long time to build that.
And credibility.
And
like
credibility.
You can say anything you want to about yourself, but a good journalist is going to like fact check you.
100%. And also democracy. Like we kind of need good journalism in
What's
functioning
that,
democracies, right? Like there are so many reasons why that's not a good idea. But it is, I did the job for like 10 years and it's really hard. It's a really hard job. Especially in the time that we live in now where newsrooms are literally buckling under themselves. There is no business model. And all the people doing that job are just trying to like not be fired and get through the day.
Totally.
So if a journalist approached me and said, I want to write a really negative story about a competitor, I would say, like, tell me more about that. Like, why do you want to write that story? What are you hoping to gain with that story? Like, is that a story that you want to write? Does your editor want you to write it? Like, what information do you have that makes this worthy of your time? And I would probably want to find out a little bit more about what the story is. And then if it felt like a story where, my competitor was like actually doing horrible, terrible things, like they were harming patients, I might want to, maybe I wouldn't put my name to it, but I might decide that it's within my kind of moral, ethical framework to want that out there because I don't want patients to be harmed. If it feels like a silly story where maybe they're writing about a competitor and saying that, it's a female CEO that has high expectations, I would probably excuse myself and say, this is not something that I don't think my competitor deserves this. And maybe I would have a conversation or a dialogue with that journalist. What I would not do is just say no. Like, I think I would spend some time with them because, again, empathy. Like, what are they hoping to get out of this? Like, what are they struggling with? Those are all questions. Those are things I think about all the time in situations like this. And I genuinely care about my journalist friends being able to keep their jobs and be successful. And my natural inclination is, how can I help you? Like, what can I do to help you? And I think a lot of people don't feel that way. It's the exact opposite. It's like, what can I get out of you?
I know. Well, and that's kind of the more common pathway is, as a founder, you have a communications team, and that comms team comes up with a pitch, and then they go out and try to get the stories. Like, that is the currency, is getting the stories. And obviously would, reply to any inbound that comes in, but it feels like the vast majority is going to be outbound. And you talk a lot about kind of founder-led communications, which is similar to this rise in like founder-led sales. Can you unpack the idea of why you think that matters and why founders shouldn't just build a comms team and step back and let them schedule things? Like, what is the founder's role in comms?
Yeah, I kind of argue that it's sort of the next big thing. Founder-led sales was really a huge movement, that it was really the idea that you have to find product market fit through learning how to sell your own product before you should hire a professional sales team. And I say the same thing to founders with communications. Like, you should spend some time sharing your story with different audiences and seeing how people relate to that story before you go and tell somebody else to do it. Because nobody is more effective at telling the story than you, the person that started the business. It's very hard to hire someone and outsource the story to somebody else if you haven't deeply spent time refining it and honing it. And then I think it is fundamentally your job to be the chief storyteller for all time. Like, I don't think that it really ever gets to a point where the company that is so big that the founder and CEO never has to be an inspiring, rallying storyteller, especially at a time when we have remote work, we have offices all across the world. Like, how do you even conceive of keeping people rowing like the boat at the same time and towards the same set of goals if the CEO isn't telling the story and rousing employees around why they should care about this business and reminding them why it matters? So I think there is always going to be, some amount of that storytelling in the role. That said, you can hire a comms team, and I think sometimes founders leave it a bit too late when it gets to the point where there's just a lot going on and maybe you need a little bit of extra help with figuring out the right ways to tell the story, or even things like you want to get on stage at Health. Like, how do you do that? Somebody's got to remind you that there is a form to fill out and you have to fill it out by a certain date. Like, things like that. You need teams of people around you just to keep you on check. And then I think a great comms leader can serve an incredible role, being aligned and reporting to the CEO, where they help everybody across the whole organization elevate their own story. They can get the chief product officer excited about being on X talking about kind of product ideas. They can get the chief legal officer at legal forums and summits. I mean, I think they can do so much if they don't just have to be sitting within marketing, doing nothing else but generating leads for the purposes of sales, which is where most of the time you see these comms teams sit. And then that leads to, if that's the case, it leads to these pitches that you see where it's just very spammy. It's like we come up with a pitch, we buy a mailing list, and then we hit send. And reporters so rarely want these pitches because the most fun part of the job is coming up with the ideas of what to write about. Like that's that is the fun of the job. And I come up with ideas all the time just through talking to people where I'm like, okay, you know, and I know my audience way better than anybody pitching me knows my audience. So I don't need help with that. Like what I need help with is just constantly expanding my network of interesting people to talk to. And I'm happy to talk to the head of comms. I'm happy to talk to the founder. I'm happy to talk to the head product. Happy to talk to anybody who's like super interesting and authentic and where I can learn from them. So I think we just need to move out of this like pitchy kind of like all outbound idea and much more into like just be authentic and interesting and like opportunities will flow from there.
Yeah. Well, I've had, you know, the last couple of years hosting this podcast, a glimpse into the world that you've been in terms of like pitches from comms and PR teams for people to be on the show. And with over the last like 2 years with the rise of AI, these pitches have just gotten so spammy and so bad. And
how many do you accept?
Like, right. Oh, I mean, we get probably 1,000 pitches a year, and you know, we have room for maybe 30 guests a year. So, you know, most of them aren't a fit, but I don't even look at most of them because they will be like, they have the same formula, Chrissy. It'll be like, I'm a big fan of The Heart of Healthcare, a digital healthcare podcast. So they do like the full what's in Apple Podcasts, even though that's not our real name. It's just like SEO stuff. I listened to your most recent podcast on like the very last guests. And I think that those topics are very relevant to the guests that I want you to speak, like just, you know, to come and they regurgitate what the last episode said. And like somehow that ties to like who they have. And it's, you know, it's just spam to me. It does not like move me whatsoever.
And that is a massive industry, by the way. A massive industry. Like
and people are paying them to do that.
Founders are paying for that, like gobs of money for that. And it's just, you know, it's maddening to me because I have worked with really great comms people. I've worked with great agencies and they're not sending me these spammy pitches all the time. Like instead it's like, they recognize I have a newsletter. I'm building an independent media company. And I think the best comms professionals that I work with are like genuinely interested in how to make my business, help me make my business successful, and are genuinely interested in what the readers want. And they're in touch all the time. And you know, a lot of them pay to subscribe to the newsletter. Like half these people that send I guarantee you 99% of them don't listen to the podcasts that send these pitches. And you can tell in the pitch, it's so impersonal. Yeah. So I think it just all needs to stop. Yeah. Like that stuff is so ineffective. And if you could just spend that money, there's so many other better uses of that money and that time, ranging from going on social media and figuring out what you want to say and then sharing it, like, and building your own audience that way. Or just reaching out to, you know, you or me and saying like, I'd love to meet. Like, I'm just really interested in XYZ topic. I'd actually love to talk about it. No pressure, but happy to meet. And a lot of people will respond to a very genuine note like that from the founder. I mean, there's so many good ideas out there, and I delve into so many of them for the book. But I think that era is over, and frankly, there are not enough journalists even out there anymore employed that this even is going to get you good results.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad to see that folks are investing in those sort of spammy outlets, because I really can't imagine that being effective with anyone. They're so like out of touch. And oftentimes I find that they're just not even close to the type of guests that we will have. It'll be like, this person's like a fitness influencer and they just came out with a new book called like Flat Abs in 30 Days. I'm just like, what? That's just so far from what we do. So anyhow, any founders listening, like listen to Chrissy's advice, get her book. Don't hire firms that will just like spam all of these podcasts, because that is not the way to do it. Chrissy, we're almost up on time. Can you just leave us with kind of one thing that any of our listeners, founders and non-founders, should be doing in their career today when it comes to storytelling?
Oh, I love that question. I think it's just to start. I would go through the exercise of saying, okay, is storytelling something I want to be doing more of? Does it make sense for me in my job, my role? I think for a lot of people it does, and many people I meet want to get better at it. And then I think it's to ask, what do you feel comfortable and excited about doing? And, if the idea of going on stage and delivering a 40-minute presentation literally makes you like suicidal, then don't do that. You don't have to. If you feel like you would be really excited to just try out writing a great post on LinkedIn about some ideas or maybe some insights you've had related to the job that you do, and you want to try it, and then you could have a friend or two read it and give feedback, like maybe that's where you start. If that feels like authentic and real, start there and just do that. Like, don't force yourself to emulate anyone else, to be anyone else. Don't make yourself uncomfortable. Yeah. I think that's where
it's not sustainable. Like,
it's not sustainable.
Yeah, you're not gonna last doing something that doesn't feel comfortable.
Totally. And if you are not, most of the storytellers I spoke to were introverts. They're not self-promoters. They don't want to talk about themselves. Don't feel that you have to talk about yourself all day long. Don't feel you have to be pitching all day long. Just like, tell us about like the last cool thing that you learned in your role as a head of product, or if you're in clinical operations, like tell us about how you cracked some huge problem in your job that like vexed you for 6 months. Like, tell us that stuff, because that's the stuff that people really want to learn about and want to read. And that's how you, I think, begin to really build a following.
Don't be cagey. I feel like a lot of founders are so afraid of like having their competitors know something about their business but like at the end of the day, sharing and the benefits that you get from just opening up the window a little bit to let people see what's happening. I think those benefits like really outweigh any cost of having competitors know that you messed up one time or, know how you've scaled something. So I love that.
If your business is so like, has such a tiny moat or no moat, to the extent that revealing something about the business is going to topple it, then I think you have bigger problems. And, a lot of what I write about in the book, by the way, is just like appetite to risk. We all really just like, we get very defensive and we get people spend way too much time thinking about risk. And there is also risk associated with saying nothing and doing nothing and being boring. Being boring is a risk, right? So I've seen way too many companies die from being boring. So don't be boring, like be fun. And, the risk is probably in your head.
Well, Chrissy, super congrats on the book. I loved reading it, and it is on shelves now today. So everyone get your copy and let Chrissy know what you think, and leave a review on Amazon. It is so helpful for authors to get those early reviews so that more people can discover the book. So, Chrissy,
and Halle, tell us when your book is coming out too.
Not for a while, January 20th. So we have a while, but
still you can start pre-ordering it, right?
Yes, it is. It is available for pre-order.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a delight to talk with you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Halle Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Krause, and Halle Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
I've got 20 minutes till Run Club meets, and it's time for a quick pre-workout snack. Go Squeeze Active Fruit Blend to the rescue. Made with select B vitamins to help release energy, it's an easy, squeezable pouch made to move with me. The taste? So good. And made with real fruit. Even better. Whether I'm hitting the trail or meeting my friends on the court, this is my go-to on-the-go snack. Quick, easy, ready when I am. When it's go time, I go with Go Squeeze Active. Snag yours on your next store run. Search for Go Squeeze on Amazon.